this movie is like one of the first. Like I can't remember what the first horror movie I saw was, but this is one of the ones I saw when I was quite young, and like it, affected me. And I remember those bits, like especially the bit where he just cuts himself open just to creep someone out. And it's like
Mm.
that really like I don't know, got under my skin in a way. Like like why does he do that? It's just to be like sadistic and weird.
Hello, everyone. This is the third Real Horror versus Real Horror, and I'm joined again by Shrouded Hand, who was the very first guest on the very first edition of this show. If you've seen the first one, which was on Ghost Watch, you know how we're going to run it. And welcome. Thanks for coming back, I suppose.
All right, yeah,
Shrouded,
great,
how you doing?
yeah. Hi, yes, I'm doing good. Glad to be back. I enjoyed our Ghost Watch conversation, so I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one, and I gave you a choice of films, and you went straight for this, no hesitation, which I'm
Hmm.
delighted about. There's a couple of strands in this related to the sort of real life horror, but
Yeah,
I suspect maybe someone is going to accuse us of just looking for an excuse to talk about a really good film. You know,
what's wrong with that?
yeah, I don't. You get weird comments on the internet. What can I say? Yeah, but I love that you had your enthusiasm for this. How
Yeah,
did you find looking to the real life side of Nightmare on Elm Street?
the Cambodia massacre and the
Mm.
I don't even know how you pronounce those people. The Hmong, is it?
Yeah, come on.
The Hmong.
I'm
The
taking that exactly from the Clint Eastwood movie Gran Torino. If it was good enough for him, then I'll try and
yeah,
pronounce it that
yeah,
way.
yeah. The Hmong community and the a wave of mysterious deaths when they came over here. Apparently, they were horribly traumatized, and
Yeah.
they were terrified to fall asleep because they thought there was like a demon coming for them or something. There's all different theories, and this is the bit that I haven't quite dove into enough yet. Was the why? I don't actually think there's an answer to why these people were dying in their sleep,
No.
and I wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive. I haven't yet done that, so I don't know how if I can talk very with any confidence on that. But there's some theories that they had a theory that it was something to do with like the nerve agents, the nerve gas that they
Mm.
were bombed with during the genocide that they went through, and it, there's no real evidence that that is the case. But there's all these different ideas and theories, and yeah, I wanted to sort of dive into that whole aspect of it, but yeah, that's still to research because the video. I'm actually working on another video at the minute
Uh-huh.
about a folklore character with who has metal claws on one hand or maybe on both hands, who
Oh.
abducts children in the night and kills them horribly, like a British folklore called Black Annis.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't even like I didn't plan it to coincide with this, but that's just, I'm sort of deep into that at the minute, and it's kind of come about weirdly that
Yeah,
I can,
that's a weird coincidence.
yeah,
Yeah, well, the real so we're filming it in the reverse order this time, which is
yeah,
kind of interesting. That's cool. So when we're talking about the real life side of A Nightmare on Elm Street, there's a couple of ways we can go from this. There is obviously the stuff you're covering with the Hmong evacuees who were covered in the news. But I was reading a Wes Craven biography, and there are a couple of smaller incidents that feed into A Nightmare on Elm Street in an interesting way. So people will know that Craven's first film, The Last House, I can't even say that. Craven's first film, The Last House on the Left, the villain is called Krug. So people have made that connection between Krug and Kruger before,
yeah,
um, as well as the themes of sort of parental vigilantism. But there's an earlier incident that the biography noted that Craven was bullied by a man, a boy called Kruger when he was in school.
hmm,
Um, so there's a smaller reference, but there was an incident that sounded really, really creepy that he said was um, another aspect feeding into the story, which was a time when he was about 11 or 12. He was living in a rough neighborhood, and about 11 p.m., 1 a.m., that time, dead of night, really, he wakes up and he hears this noise outside and looks, and there's a tall guy in a fedora hat trying to break in, rattling the door of the apartment he's living in. And he says he had that imagery in his head. He couldn't get it out of his head. And I mean, I'll check. I think he said when he went to look for it, there was no sign of this guy. It gave me sort of vibes of, if you've heard of the Hat Man. I saw people talking about that. Oof.
Yeah. I was reading the Wikipedia for Nightmare on Elm Street and like what other influences it had, and it said something about he'd seen some creepy old man like in the street while he was walking home one night, and this guy just like turned and stared at him, and he based some of the look of this man. I don't know whether it was like the stripy sweater or what, but I think he'd sort of seen this creepy old man in the street.
Yeah, he's drawing on a lot of stuff, I think, in making this. So it makes it very interesting to see. One of the aspects I find really interesting about Wes Craven is basically how reluctant he is to be a horror icon. He obviously got his break, as so many people do, working in horror. He was working closely with Sean Cunningham, the man behind Friday the 13th. And, it's a really easy way to get your start. You make a cheapy horror movie and you sell it to a grindhouse production studio. And he made waves doing that, but he always wanted to move beyond horror and try lots of different stuff, to the point where he even ends up making a kind of comedy musical called Music of the Heart as a passion project. As one of the later films he managed to do.
Is that what he wanted to do? He wanted to really do musicals, and he just ended up doing slashers?
He wanted to do a variety of things. I wish that biography were fresher in my brain, because the whole time I was reading it, there were so many movies that ended up being fronted by someone else, like dramas that Craven worked on initially, and then the studio didn't want him to be the director because he was the horror guy. So he was too successful in one genre, and
you'd think if that was the case, then he'd make worse horror films. When you sort of deliberately do a bad job on something so people don't ask you to do it again. But his horror films are so good. It's like, he must have enjoyed making them, a bit, because he makes such great movies. But like, you think he'd make like, I'll just half-ass this one, and then they'll ask me to do something else.
I'm not even doing a synopsis for this one. I think everyone knows A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's that influential. We're not even going to do the synopsis, so we can save time. We can talk about wonderful things like that.
Yeah, well, there's a bit in the film where she's in, when she's fallen asleep in the class, and the teacher's talking about Shakespeare and all these themes, and they kind of start to relate to what's going on in the film. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Like, where's that coming from? That's quite deep. But if he was an English teacher in a former life, then
yeah, definitely,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that in him. In this, I mean, on one level, I want to say that A Nightmare on Elm Street is Craven showing that horror can have a lot going on. And in one way, I want to say it's kind of a reaction to the idea that with The Last House on the Left, that he just made cheap, stupid horror. But I don't even see Last House on the Left as cheap and stupid. I mean, it was cheap, yeah, but there's a lot of things going on in that movie, a lot of clever stuff happening.
Yeah, I enjoyed that film. Last House on the Left. It's very dark, like really dark, and so I don't know. It doesn't feel like other horror films I've seen. It feels different. It's and the whole like abduction and the whole like that whole scene where they're just in the like little wooded area and just doing terrible things. It's just it's a nasty film, but yeah, you can see he's trying to do something different from that film onwards. I don't really know much about like Wes Craven. Like, I wouldn't be able to name all his films. I don't really know much about him apart from the big hitters, really. So,
well, let's say we got that he moved into directing from basically the academic side and his familiarity with film. He was being creative, getting students used to understanding texts and stories on a deeper level, but also creating their own stories, using the university equipment to just make kind of, how can I say, more unstructured films, and the university wasn't happy with it. They wanted
Right.
it to be a lot more restrictive. I think it was a relatively conservative college that he was at, which is where he would have gone because his background was in a very strong Baptist family. And so that would have been a bit of a scandal. So he moves out of that. He moves into getting work as just an editor, and then working his way up from that. And then he gets to know Sean Cunningham of Friday the 13th. Sean Cunningham actually directed a bit of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was something that surprised me.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's when Tina's being chased in the alley in the backyard. That was Sean Cunningham doing some second unit stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah, and with the long-armed Freddy.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the things that I remember from my first viewing years and years ago was that long-armed Freddy. There's so many little images in this film that just are sort of burned into my mind forever now.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I love that scene in the alleyway. Good.
Yeah, it's maybe not the strongest effect, but I think the logic of it is brilliant. That dream logic that's throughout A Nightmare on Elm Street is so powerful. This idea that he just extends and blocks off the entire alleyway with his arms. It's a really creepy image. It's trying to ground you in the world, and this film, I think, it's one of the things that always gets celebrated for is how well it gets dream logic.
Yeah, and it's like it sort of, in Scream, where they're talking about how the girl will always run up the stairs when she should be running out the door and doing illogical things. It's kind of like it shows that Craven was thinking about these things back then, because it perfectly explains why the characters are doing completely illogical things, because they're in a dream. Like, why does Tina, when she hears something outside and it breaks, there's like stones being thrown about against the window, it's so hard that it breaks the window, why does she go downstairs on her own and just walk out into the alleyway behind the house? It's completely illogical. It doesn't make any sense. And like in a typical slasher film, she might do that anyway, but because it's a dream, it makes sense in the dream, because you're in a dream, you do things that don't make any sense anyway. So yeah, I like that.
Absolutely. Maybe it's a reach, but I think Christopher Nolan leaned on that idea so much in Inception, the idea that there's a dream logic in films. Like there's a logic in film that you just accept that doesn't actually make sense in real life, but it really works in dreams.
Yeah.
And that thing of, of course you just go out, you just go anywhere, and then your locations, which shouldn't be next to each other, just lead directly into each other. And that happens so much as well, and that feels very dreamlike. You mentioned the class earlier, which I thought was absolutely amazing.
That's one of my favorite scenes. I shouldn't say that, because there's so many great scenes. I don't know what my favorite scene is, but that is a good scene.
There's so much that's great about, like, subtle details that ring really true. Like, you just notice in the background that the other pupils just freeze completely still. And nothing really directs your attention to it, but it helps cement the idea that it's Nancy's dream. Yeah, she's the only protagonist here. Nothing else is really real.
Yeah.
And the kid at the front of the class he keeps on talking, but he talks in a weird whispery way.
And it's like when you're asleep and you can hear a sound from the real world, and it kind of comes into your dream. That's happened to me a few times, and that was really good. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, really recalls like the feeling of a dream. That whole bit of the voice coming through and being all slowed down and creepy and
call myself a king of infinite space.
The one that really worked for me is when Nancy is running away and she goes up the stairs and her feet sink. I've had so many scary dreams where just you're trying to rush and you're going absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
that really worked for me. That I just thought, yes, you absolutely. Maybe Craven's just. Maybe those things are universal. I don't know, but that felt.
I think they are. Yeah, I think.
Stimulating.
Yeah, I think that quite a lot of times in films where they try and do a dream sequence, it doesn't feel believable. Like the characters are too lucid in a way, and things sort of I don't know, things make sense too much within the dream, or they just try and make it really random and just throw loads of random stuff in. But this is more like they actually considered how the dream like is put together, and like you say, you go through one bit, there's a bit where she goes down into the cellar, and then the next minute she's falling through a window outside,
Yes.
and it is like that. It's like they've really considered how a dream's constructed and what it feels like, and that thing of running away, and just I've had that as well so many times. I've had dreams where I'm just trying to run. It's not like my feet are sinking into something, but I'm just, there's something like pushing me, or my feet just won't move, and that sensation. They've really considered what a dream feels like and what a nightmare feels like, and got that down. Yeah.
Thinking of how horror was at this time, remember we're deep in slasherdom basically.
Yeah.
And I don't think Craven bore any ill will to Sean Cunningham. Anyone making that kind of thing, obviously, he's still friends with Cunningham, has him come on and do a little extra shooting for him. But I think he clearly wanted to distinguish himself, and he understood horror so well that he was able to use some of the horror, I suppose we could say cliches, but make them not cliches, make them work, and reframe them, as we said, as dream logic. A Nightmare on Elm Street uses things that make no sense in real life, like like Jason or Michael just teleporting wherever they need to be. But in the dream world, that's absolutely fine. In fact, it's to its credit because it feels true in a dream.
Yeah.
But he also does, I suppose, one of the risks that he must have been aware of is that problem of, if it's all happening in a dream, on some level you might think, doesn't matter. So he's very clever to establish the rules in basically the first scene. In fact, it is the first scene. It's Tina's dream.
Yeah.
They make sure from the very start that you can be hurt in the dreams, that there's a cost to it. That's the first thing that happens in the movie. I thought that was a very good decision.
Yeah. There's also like weird bits where it almost like toys with the idea that even though Freddy can only get you in your dreams, really, it's almost like from the very beginning. I always thought that, when you see those girls skipping and they're singing the 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
Yeah.
I always felt like they were like meant to be like a dream, like dream figures almost, like, but in the real world. And it was almost like, even though Freddy was only could only get you in your dreams, it was almost like he was starting to come through into the real world and influence it in some way. I always felt like those girls skipping were like something a bit sort of weird, and maybe like a bit like paranormal, or a bit, like they weren't really meant to be there. You see them at the end, don't you? And it's almost like that they're not real, and it's almost like they're dream characters, but in the real world. I don't know whether that's just me, but
I don't think that's I don't think that's too crazy, actually, and it's an idea that Craven returns to quite a lot. So he really likes the idea, just as you said, that the nightmare world and the real world aren't as distinct. They do bleed into each other. And I think that's part of his general idea that stories are important. Stories do impact on us. I mean, if you're making a movie as a film director, you want to believe that what you're doing matters on some level, that you're telling a story that impacts people. And so there was a more direct version of this in Shocker, which is about someone moving, a killer who can move along the sort of TV channels to sort of really mangle what was happening in that. And then also in Scream, he talks about that interplay between the movie world and the real world in a more nuanced way than a lot of commenters were doing at the time. But he's he's very certain that one influences the other. Your real life influences your dreams, but your dreams influence your real life as well.
Yeah. I
And
suppose in New Nightmare as well, he was sort of playing with that whole idea of, well, which bit was like the movie and which bit was the real thing, and the character of Freddy as a movie monster sort of became sort of almost like a real thing in people's minds. So he became real in real life. That was a whole sort of idea. It's been a while since I've seen that film, but I seem to remember it being something along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. He was doing a lot in that. I mean, I think that movie is incredibly underexplored.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me that he does Scream immediately after New Nightmare, and both of them he's talking about that idea of horror needing to be real and how it influences real life. And he talks about it in a way that isn't the sort of standard dialogue. It's not a call to censorship, but it is a call to do horror seriously and be mindful. Like, he was very annoyed with maybe annoyed is the wrong word, but he was disappointed in what they made of Freddy in the sequels.
Yeah, I
He
can
was
see that.
very junior when he made this. He basically signed away all his rights to New Line Cinema. I hope I got that right. Wouldn't that be embarrassing? Yeah, it is New Line Cinema. He signs that away to Bob Shea, and then Nightmare on Elm Street is a huge success, and he finds himself actually a little unable to really have all that much influence on the series,
Yeah,
which isn't to
takes
make
on a
it.
life of its own, doesn't it? Probably
It
like
does, yeah.
in the same sort of themes he's exploring, really. The almost like a thought form becoming something else, and it's
Yeah, yeah,
Freddy
and
especially like just becomes almost like you can see the kernel of it, the sort of playfulness in this. You
yeah,
can see the kernel of what Freddy becomes in later movies. You know, it's like he becomes so like he becomes almost like a cartoon character, doesn't he? He's like a funny serial killer, but you know,
yeah. There's a few moments just where he's doing things that are just meant to gross someone out, and he's enjoying
yeah,
it. So, with Tina in the backyard, he's just like, Tina, look.
he cuts his, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just to gross them out.
Yeah,
Like
but
in
it's
one
almost
in
like they're trying to make him like it's almost like that makes him more sadistic and evil. Like it makes him really like I don't know. Like I feel like the playful elements of him were just there's something about him that it's really dark in this movie. Like it's not it's funny on the surface, you know. It's kind of a bit lighthearted, but like when you really think about it, it's really like kind of dark. And he's the fact that he's like a child murderer and all this, and he has this slightly playful side to him where he seems like he's having fun and enjoying himself whilst like terrorizing and killing people. It's
oh,
almost like it's
it's
there just to make him like seem more sadistic and darker. But in later movies, it's like they took that aspect of him and just blew that up and made him into this like comedy character almost.
it's what they'd call a boulderization or a flanderization, which is just taking a couple of usually more mass appeal
Mm.
elements of something and just blowing that up and blowing that up.
I always think of the one where he's playing on a computer game and he's got someone like trapped in the computer game and he's just sat there playing Nintendo or something. Yeah.
Just for you, Shrouded, I'm going to use that clip now instead. I'm going to break it up. Yeah. And I think you draw the distinction. He is, in this version, he is sadistic. He feels so in control of the dream world that he actually can, because he can be anywhere, do anything, he can really enjoy scaring them.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
can just taunt them. He's going out of his way to be sadistic and creative in creeping them out. But as you go along,
There's a
yeah,
bit where he like cuts himself open and he's just like he's like full of maggots.
yeah.
It's just like why does he do it? I remember that because like this movie is like one of the first, like I can't remember what the first horror movie I saw was, but this is one of the ones I saw when I was quite young, and like it, affected me. And I remember those bits, like especially the bit where he just cuts himself open just to creep someone out, and it's like that really like I don't know, got under my skin in a way. Like, like why does he do that? It's just to be like sadistic and weird.
Oh,
It's just,
completely, completely.
mm,
He's a horrible guy, and like he gets on top of Tina, and she just manages to pull his face off,
yeah,
which is it's got that dream logic combination. It's that sort
yeah,
of, oh, that shouldn't work, but it's
mhm.
also it's so nasty what she sees underneath, and
Oh yeah,
that vision of him is genuinely unsettling, genuinely sadistic. And so by the time you go a few sequels down and it's more of a playing for comedy, saying don't take it seriously, you
hmm
can see why Craven includes the line in Scream about the series.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
I like that movie. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
honestly, watching the first one back again, and I have watched it so many times, but I always like I used to work my way through the box set of them because I
Mm,
really like the ridiculous sequels as well. I like how silly it gets, but it's always quite a surprise once you've worked your way through the movies and then going back
mm,
to watch this again, like just how dark it is. There's some absolutely like horrifying scenes,
mm,
like that dream in the classroom when she looks over and she sees Tina and she's just in a body bag with all blood
mm,
coming down her. And it's just there's some really like really dark scenes in this film, and you wouldn't think it like once it is surprising once you've seen how it gets late in later sequels. Watching it back now, and I was like trying to analyze it a bit more. I was thinking about these things and how
mm,
they cast the parents, and yeah, all the families look quite wholesome from first appearances, but
mm.
they all seem like a bit like they've got a bit of a darker undertone as the movie goes on, before
I
you
th-
even find out their secret.
yeah, I think that is something Craven was interested in. I'm sorry, drink every time I say. I think that's something Craven explored a lot, but in a sort of David Lynch way, he's interested in this idea of trying to present this sort of fiction of civilization, this fiction of
Mm,
good manners and culture, and saying that actually there's a lot of darkness underneath that. There's a lot of darkness that's still in us. So in
yeah,
this one, as you say,
that
yeah,
was
the parents are haunted inside the home. There's a fair amount of conflict. Nancy's mum drinks. Her dad's extremely stern. Glenn, Johnny Depp's family are really quite interesting. They have quite a stern dynamic. Like his dad is just very no nonsense, taking
mm,
over. Um, and it's one of those films where you have the idea of the adults do not know best very much, even though
yeah,
you completely
yeah,
understand what they do. Um, and in that, I'm referring to the idea of making sure your child gets a good night's sleep. I'm not rushing straight forward to, oh yeah, kerosining the local nonce, of course.
yeah.
Making him do the old kerosene can. That's not exactly what I was referring to, but
Mm,
yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting how they show a sort of darker side within the home.
Yeah, that was going back again to that classroom scene. That's kind of what she was talking about with when the teacher was talking about Shakespeare. She was saying
Mm,
something about how Shakespeare was exploring themes of, I can't remember what the exact line is. It's something about like some sort of corruption within people, or
mm,
an inner. She said something along the lines of like an inner decay.
According to Shakespeare, there was something operating in nature, perhaps inside human nature itself, that was rotten.
And interestingly, that's the scene like right after when she meets Freddy, is when he cuts himself open and reveals that he's full of green slime and maggots. So I don't know whether that was deliberate,
that is
but
such a good catch.
mm,
That is such a good catch. I mean, we're doing a hagiography here of A Nightmare on Elm Street. We are just praising it because I don't
mm,
think it's like people are writing it off anymore. I think people do see it as an intelligent film, but
yeah,
you can look at things like that and point out there was some thought in this.
hmm
There's loads of little touches that I just picked up this time. The classroom scene is kind of becoming my favorite, to be honest.
yeah,
It's She gets taunted in the dream world, and Nancy gets taunted about needing a hall pass. And when she's gone through this really intense experience, she's had to burn herself to wake up within the dream world, which again is a nice sort of establishing of the rule. The teacher is another completely useless adult who then says, after Nancy's had this massive freak out and is gone, she says, "Oh, you need a hall pass."
Yeah, yeah,
I love that. I thought that was some lovely observed humor in it.
yeah. And it's like the the teenager just decided, no, I'm just going to do what I want. This is bigger than school and adults' concerns. This is, you don't understand. I'm just going to take my destiny into my own hands. It's,
Yeah.
that whole thing.
Yeah, Elm Street is a world where the adults in control set very strict rules, but do not necessarily keep them and do not really understand the purpose of them. But the dream world, where you are far more free, where the teenagers can do whatever they want, is dangerous. And I think that's a kind of nuanced position that the film is taking. You're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street being a movie that you could just put on and enjoy and turn your brain off.
It's got like a broad appeal thing to it. It's if you want to look for the deeper elements in the film, you can, and you can appreciate that. But it's just such a you can just completely turn your brain off and just enjoy it for what it is. Just a creepy guy with a burnt face and knives for fingers, just going around slashing people up in their dreams. It's, you don't have to go deep dive into the meanings behind everything. It's got that sort of that's probably what, for my first viewings, that's probably what I liked about it. It was just
hang on, wait, you don't need to do an obsessively far-reaching sort of elaborate analysis. That's my whole channel, Shrouded. That's the whole thing.
I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying you don't have to. If you want to just enjoy it, you just want to kick back, have a couple of drinks and just enjoy a spooky movie. It's perfect for that.
You really can. It is a lot of fun. It's not a David Lynch film in terms of requiring interpretation. It is just something you can enjoy. I was really enjoying some of the early setup this time, like the kind of goofy stuff of Johnny Depp's character Glenn doing the old round robin, pretending he's staying at his cousin's house, and it's near an airport, so he plays a tape. And I was just really enjoying how silly that was.
Yeah, there was a lot of that in like movies around that time, wasn't there? There was a scene in Ferris Bueller's Day Off where he does something like that. He like calls up and takes some sounds on his keyboard, and there was a lot of that sort of messing with phones and technology and stuff in 80s movies. I remember that. Yeah, I like that.
It's just a lot of fun, and the characters are likable. You can, which is a massive help, to be honest, in getting into it. It's also very brisk. This is a 90-minute movie.
Yeah, and there's no boring bits at all. Like every scene is quite like that scene where they're in the room that's the sleepover and he's playing the tape and all that. That jumps from that to they hear a noise outside, they go outside, and then Rod jumps out and scares them, and then it sort of keeps up the pace. It goes from one thing to another. It doesn't like I can imagine another film just playing out the scenes with the sleepover and just sort of having them sort of sit around having a big long conversation about their dreams and all that, and just getting a bit sort of plodding and a bit slow, but it just sort of all the conversations are really to the point. They really just bring, they're always, almost always about like something that's going on, something that sort of advances the plot forward. Like, oh, you had the same dream as me. What did it look like? Oh my God, yeah. It's almost like everything is there. It's never just like, it never feels like it's just like padding out the movie to make it a bit longer. It's just like it always like keeps on the pace and keeps it moving.
I think you'll be like me in like you've watched enough movies, when they're padding, when they're just trying to get to feature length. And there's a good example of Nightmare on Elm Street not doing that, which is when they take Nancy into the sleep analysis lab, which always feels like a kind of weird scene to me, but it's throwing a bit of science in, and just establishing a new rule. So it's not just repeat. They don't actually show her dream sequence, but you just see the results of it, which is kind of interesting. And then you get something new out of it, that she can bring something physical back from the dream world. That's when she gets Freddy Krueger's hat. And it's so you could easily imagine that they could stick a 4 or 5 minute dream sequence again. But then you're seeing Nancy effectively evade Freddy again and again, and you're diminishing the threat. So they don't want to do that. I mean, maybe it's a budgetary issue, I don't know. But it also just so happens to be a very clever storytelling choice. Don't dilute the threat. Don't have her keep escaping the same way.
Yeah, and it's sort of, as the movie goes on, you're aware of how, like, because she's keeping herself awake, and you can see the bags under her eyes getting darker and darker, and you're kind of aware that the threat of suddenly falling asleep is getting worse and worse as the movie goes on, and the idea that, you know, you can't just evade him. Like, pretty much everyone who encounters him dies almost straight away. So, you know, it is the idea that she could fall asleep at any minute. The risk is getting worse and worse, and there isn't that sort of, oh, she could just get away from him. It's like, if you fall asleep, you're probably dead.
Yeah, it's a very clever threat. It's a very clever premise. As well as like her chugging coffee, which I like, and it really cracks me up when she pulls a coffee machine out from under her bed. I was like, oh, that is such a vibe. I need this. I need that in my life. But she also, I think she gets a little bit of a grey streak in towards the end, and I think I could be wrong. I think in the third one, when Nancy comes back, she's got fully developed grey streaks, which I thought was such a cool touch.
I think she gets that grey streak at the sleep institute. I think, I'm pretty sure she like wakes up with the hat, and they're like, "Oh my god, a hair!" I don't know. I seem to remember something like that.
I'll check for when it happens. But I noticed when she was talking to Glenn on the phone, I thought, oh, that's such a cool detail. There's so much in this, like in the design of the film, that makes it so good. Like, we can do our big analysis, but as you say, you can just enjoy it for a well-constructed film. Stuff like when her mum takes her down into the basement to discuss and sort of reveal the truth about Freddy Krueger. Just in shot is a sledgehammer that she will later use in a trap. And I just thought, that's really clever. It's just shot. I'll steal from Red Letter Media. You may not have seen it, but your brain did. I'd never noticed it, but it's just, you've seen it a few times and you have time to, you start looking around the scene, and I just noticed, oh yeah, there's a sledgehammer she's going to use. That's where she found it.
Well, then in that case, what's the significance of that weird dog painting that they've got down in the basement? I think you see it in
the
like
dog paint. I haven't seen a dog painting.
I'm sure, like, unless I'm remembering it wrong, I think it might appear in the dream where she goes down into, the final dream where she goes down into her own basement and she looks for the glove and it's not there. I'm sure you see behind the boiler or whatever, the furnace, on the wall, there's this really weird painting of like cartoon dogs.
Oh no,
I did see that and I thought, has that got some kind of significance that I'm missing? But
I mean, I do have my questions. Why was there a sheep in Tina's dream at the start? There's one shot of a sheep.
Counting sheep.
Yeah, counting sheep, innocent lambs to the slaughter, maybe. There's that weird Avenue Q looking puppet toy that Nancy has on her bed.
I noticed that. That was strange.
I was weirdly fixated on that this time. I was going to go off on a little tangent about asking if you'd heard of a podcast called The Worst Idea Ever.
No, I never heard of that.
It's two Australian guys, and they wanted to do a film podcast, and they did the same film every week for a whole year. So they watched Grown Ups 2 52 times, and then they did Sex and the City 2 52 times, and just came back and reviewed it. And
that sounds good.
It was brilliant. Like, I mean, maybe I'm a horrible sadist. I've certainly, I make sure to watch every episode of Heel versus Babyface covering MILF Manor. I watch it for the article, obviously. But these two guys on the podcast got obsessed with noticing tiny little details
Yeah.
in the background, like weird extras in the coffee shop they get obsessed with.
Mm.
And it's like this on this viewing is I know the action well enough that my brain just starts looking like and asking, why does she have a weird, creepy purple dog puppet?
Yeah.
How is that?
I was doing. I think maybe because I knew I was doing this recording that, you know, we'd be talking about it, so I was looking for details. But yeah, it does. The more you watch things, the more. There's a similar thing going on at the minute. Me and my wife are watching The Office, the American one, for like the millionth time. Anytime we just run out of something to watch together, we put The Office on, and we were just applying for it we've seen it so many times, and we're doing this exactly the same thing. We're like seeing things in early episodes that come up again like seasons later, or slight things that are wrong, and we're just really like picking apart these like weird details. So yeah, a similar thing with Nightmare on Elm Street. I feel like I have watched it so many times over the years that every time I see something different, go, yeah, that's weird.
My really sad version of that is Buffy, and watching that so many times that I started to recognize all the vampire stuntmen.
Oh,
and they just turn up. There's one Latino looking stuntman who turns up constantly, and I just keep seeing it's him.
Yeah.
And I can't look away now. In the fight scenes, I'm not emotionally invested. I'm just looking, is that guy there? It's terrible. It's a very bad habit. Yeah, as we're saying, hugely influential. It spawns a massive series, I believe. From a quick head count, it's an extra nine movies in the series, including the remake and Freddy's Nightmares, a series which, yes, I have not seen. I'm sure it is absolutely wonderful, but I'm not going to comment on. And then outside of that, I think it's had so many imitators. The scene with Nancy in the bath, which we haven't spoken about yet, which is so good. Just so good. I think that massively influenced 1993's Body Snatchers, where you have a similar character who even looks a lot like Heather Langenkamp in this. Oh, there's a scene in the bath.
I have seen it. Yeah. I just can't. I'm trying to think of that scene.
Same threat in the bath. Danger is falling asleep. In this case, not because Freddy will get you, but because one of the alien pods will reach down to you and claim you in the sleep. I think it's a really good scene. It's done differently, but I think there's no way it wasn't inspired.
Yeah.
And in a major one, and this is pure coincidence, but I was watching at someone's suggestion Terrifier recently from 2016. It's a killer clown movie.
Yeah, with the clown. I've seen the character. I've never seen the movie.
Yeah, I mean, a really good character design. It looks amazing. Yeah. I've got to get my brain around it because I'm torn on whether it counts as a film or not. It's an interesting one, but the very start of Terrifier, which I thought is just padding for time because it's 85 minutes long, so we get a long title sequence at the start, and we get a scene where the character Art the Clown is getting ready to go out killing. And I was watching that and thinking, hey, this is Nightmare on Elm Street. This is exactly how Nightmare on Elm Street starts, with Freddy getting ready, putting his glove on. And it's I think it's an explicit homage, and they even have an in memory of Wes Craven at the end of Terrifier. Right. So I think there's no way it was an accident. I think it's a very deliberate tribute to A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, I vaguely remember a scene. I could be remembering this completely wrong, but it's not a scene in one of the Jack Frost movies where, about the killer snowman. There's a scene where he ends up in someone's bathwater and he does a similar thing. He sort of pops up between their legs and attacks them some way. I might be remembering it completely wrong, but
I do not know my Jack Frost. I'm ashamed to say.
It's years since I watched him, but yeah.
I remember the videotape so well. My local Blockbuster had a copy of that, and it had one of those cover printings where if you moved, the image changed. If you looked at it from different angles. So you had the peaceful Jack Frost and you had the scary Jack Frost. on the same cover. It's weird what sticks in your head, isn't it? One of the things I sort of have to ask you as we probably move towards the end of the conversation. Do you have any feelings about the 2010 remake, if you saw that?
I watched it maybe a year or so ago, and I don't know, I quite liked the look of the Freddy character. Like, I'd seen pictures of him, and I liked what they'd done with the design. It was almost like they tried to make him more like Weasley and more kind of burnt and creepy looking, but I don't know, it just didn't, the movie just it like it plodded on. Like I say, like the first one, just the pace is up, and this I don't know, something just didn't sit right with me with the remake. The Freddy's voice kind of threw me off. He sounded weird, and there was just something about I think it was just like the pacing, and there was a lot of, I seem to remember there was a lot of like digital effects in there
Yeah.
that I didn't really like, you know, especially when you've got so many iconic practical effects in the first movie. It's kind of hard to follow it up with a movie that's full of like CGI blood and things like that. And I don't know, it kind of like washed over me, and I don't really remember much of it, but I remember when it started out, I was like, oh, this might be good. And then by the end of it, I was like ready for it to end. And that's pretty much my only like impression of it. It was a bit meh, you know. I don't know, what do you think of it?
I think that's very fair. I think it's unfairly maligned. Like, a lot of people, the impression I get is people tend to think it's the worst. It's unfathomably bad. I don't think it is at all.
No, it wasn't terrible.
No, it came late in the remake cycle. You know, it was 2010. Remake cycle started about 2003. And a lot of thought went into it. There was some stuff in it I really liked. I thought it did a really great job with the kind of paranoia of them lacking sleep. If I'm going to criticize something in A Nightmare on Elm Street, I'd probably say that they could have done a bit more work to make you believe that the kids were, you know, desperately lacking sleep and really feeling the effects of it. And I think the 2010 remake lent into that quite a lot. There was a scene in a pharmacy where they're trying to get any kind of pill they can to stay awake. I thought that was quite good. That was an interesting direction. I really liked the casting. Clancy Brown was one of the dads, and they showed Freddy being offed, which I liked. I'd mentally assumed that they showed it in this, and I just misremembered that completely. Whereas that is in the remake, and I liked it.
But I think what you said about them not putting across in the original movie, like how sleep deprived the kids were, and I think there was also I think that has something to do with like keeping the pace of the movie up, because I didn't really get a sense of how much time had passed until is it Nancy said Johnny Depp was on the phone to her, and it's like, how long have you been without sleeping? She's like 7 days.
7 days.
It felt, you know, I thought like it'd been like a couple of just like 2 days or something, but you know, it was a whole week of them not sleeping. And yeah, I think that is just keeping the pace of the movie going, and you know, they didn't probably have time to put in all those bits where you saw how sleep deprived they were. Just paint a few bags under her eyes, and that's it.
Yeah, we could have had a little bit more of that, but as you say, it's 90 minutes, and it's a compact, concise 90 minutes. It's not. You and I have probably seen quite a few 78-minute films that feel like they're 2 hours long, just because they are padded back and forth just to get the runtime. And this is not that. It is a tight film. It is a wonderfully directed film. There is intelligent symbolism there is a worldview in it, and there's also enough effects that it sticks with you, that you just forget about how much stuff there is in here.
Yeah. For me, it's the playground movie. It's the movie that everyone was sort of talking about when I was a kid. Freddy Krueger was like the ultimate like bogeyman monster that everyone was like talking about. It was such a like the image of him was so iconic that that was sort of like almost like when you thought of horror movies, that was kind of like the go-to image that I remember. And everyone used to talk about Nightmare on Elm Street as if it was like the scariest movie ever made, and you know, that was like the epitome of horror movies. And there was the odd kid who had seen it and they'd tell you scenes from it, and there was always like rumors about like. I remember kids telling me there were certain scenes where it was real and the actors had actually been killed to make the scene like it was a snuff movie. There was always like all these weird rumors about it, and it was just one of those films that I really remember it from my childhood. Just even though I hadn't seen it, it was just like iconic, and all like everyone was talking about this film, and everyone sort of knew the character of Freddy Krueger, and it's just so iconic, and that's like what I really remember about it.
Yeah, the cultural impact is huge. It took me ages to see it.
Yeah.
Just because my Blockbuster didn't have it. It wasn't in Woolworths. It wasn't in the independent video store I was a member of. So it took me absolutely ages to. Same with Friday the 13th. It took me so long to actually see them, but the cultural meme had reached me so long before, and because it's just. And I think it's justified not by there just being such a strong premise and such a strong character design, but it's a strong enough film that it just spreads. And
one thing I noticed, and I don't know whether this is just sort of, I don't know what the symbolism of this is, but I know it's like in the dream sequences they're always descending downwards, and I guess that's sort of to show that they're getting deeper and deeper into their dream, or just descending down is like I guess it's like a shorthand for getting closer to like an evil, isn't it? Or like getting closer to hell or something like that. But I also noticed when they died, they always went up towards the ceiling. Like the Tina's death, she gets put on the ceiling. Johnny Depp, his blood flies up to the ceiling, and the guy gets hung. I think that was everyone's death, isn't it?
Yeah, you're not wrong.
I didn't know whether there was any reason for that, or whether it was just a coincidence, or
there is a reason for Tina and Glenn, and that's the fact that their very creative deaths were filmed on the same set. It was a room that they could rotate.
Right.
And that was expensive, so they decided, look, if we're going to do this, we have got to use it a lot. So they did 2 deaths in there. They redressed the room to get a very different effect. They also had a kind of a problem because once they pumped in 200 gallons of blood into that room, suddenly the mechanics work a little different, and it's a lot harder to rotate that room with 200 gallons of blood in it.
Right.
And it started leaking out, and the production team had a lot of fun with that. But you're absolutely not wrong that what's his name?
Rod.
Rod, yes, Rod Lane. He gets strung up as well.
I mean, it could just be a coincidence, and like if they built this set and they want people to die in some creative way, so they have them go on to see, and then Rod's death is he gets hung, so it's just natural that he would get strung up. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but I didn't know if there was some like some kind of balance between the descending in the dreams and then in the real life they're getting raised up. I wasn't sure.
That's a really interesting one.
I think maybe it might just be me because because I knew we were doing this recording. I was probably over analyzing every scene, trying to.
No, there is no over analyzing on this channel. I mean, I can't remember which video it was in, but I said that I felt one of the things going on in this film is a sort of reaction to the Vietnam War. There's a big thing of the children are paying for the violence of their parents, the way, you'd have been conscripted and sent abroad, and then Nancy is making improvised traps the way soldiers faced in the Vietnam jungle. So there is no overanalyzing, because if there is, then some of the things I've said could be very silly, and obviously they're not. All my analysis is valid, and definitely.
Fair enough. Surprisingly low body count for such a gory, horrific movie, really, isn't it?
Well, it's quite restrained. I think probably there's some budget, but probably also a large amount of. This was done in 1985. We were 5 Friday the 13th deep at this point. And I think Craven is a canny enough guy to know what works. Now, also, Halloween came out, and Halloween has a low body count, the original. and it amps up. And I think Craven probably sees that and thinks, I don't want to just off a whole bunch of forgettable teenagers. I want to have a cast that you focus on and care about a bit more.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably in there as well.
Yeah, because you kind of get the impression, like I kind of got the impression that Johnny Depp's character would survive. Like he was almost like, you know, he kind of retained his virtue, you know, in the sort of morality tale aspect of it. You know, the two that had sex got offed quite soon, and I thought like Johnny Depp and his girlfriend. I always forget their names.
Yeah, Glenn and Nancy.
Glenn and Nancy. I got the impression that they would survive. Like watching it through again, like it's almost like it's trying to make you think that Johnny Depp would survive till the end of the movie, and like that when he does get killed, it's like it's like supposed to be like a shocking surprise because the audience wouldn't be expecting it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think they did put enough in there to keep you guessing. Like you see both of their sets of parents, so you get the idea that they are both established. They're both a bit more developed, which makes you think, okay, it could be a protagonist. Yeah. And there's a few instances where you really do think Nancy's going to get offed, and it's going to go on to Glenn being the sole surviving guy.
Yeah. Oh, there's another thing I wanted to say. The end sequence.
Oh, yes.
From where she falls asleep to where she pulls Freddy out and into the real world. Is that whole bit from where she falls asleep, is that meant to be a dream sequence? And she never actually woke up? Because when they get in the car at the end and, you know, it turns out it's like a Freddy car and her mum gets pulled through the window. Is it all meant to be she didn't really wake up? It was just all a dream from the get-go. Is that the implication, or?
The final scene is difficult. It wasn't something that Wes Craven wanted to put in. It wasn't something he wrote. It was very much at the insistence of the producer, Bob Shea, who saw this film. And I think obviously the big dollar signs lit up in his eyes. He was like, we've got something good here, but we can't stop. So we'll put a sequel hook in.
Yeah.
But there was a different ending planned, and at Bob Shea's insistence, they shot this film, this final scene, which extends it. And if you wanted to be critical, you could say it almost undoes Nancy's work, because she ends the film having taken in the lessons that she picked up from both Glenn and her mother about how you don't give the nightmare power over you. You can take all the energy back by not focusing on it, which is quite I thought it could sound cheesy, but I think it's sold so very well. But then that extends out into this hyper saturated, overly sunny dream sequence. The mum's suddenly just in a deliberately kind of cheesy way, just like, yeah, honey, I'm giving up the booze. I just don't feel like it anymore. And it's like too rosy. It's obviously a bit corny.
No, baby, I'm gonna stop drinking. I just don't feel like it anymore.
You are meant to be able to catch it, and then it gives you that final sequence showing actually Freddy's still in charge, Freddy's still in power, but how you interpret that is muddy because Nancy comes back alive. So it's a bit hard to mesh with what we see, to be honest, and I think that's because it wasn't the original ending.
Yeah. So was it meant to end where she turns her back on Freddy? Because I reckon that might have been a bit of a disappointing ending. If you know, it might have wrapped up more neatly. But I don't know. I like the idea of that whole I'm not giving you power over me. But I thought it kind of looked a bit sort of cheesy, like, you know, where Freddy sort of goes and he sort of dissolves into this light and he's like screaming.
It's better than the lightning effect in Hellraiser, you know. We've got to give it that, but yeah, it does look a bit cheesy. Yeah, well, I feel like if it ended there, it would be quite a disappointing ending. Like I quite like that bit that they tacked on the end, sort of say, oh, but was it really just all a dream? And I don't know. Maybe if he didn't have to tack that ending on, he would have done something a bit more spectacular for the actual ending, or, you know, maybe done it a little bit differently. I don't know. Yeah, I'm tempted to say I like a sequel hook. You know, I think it's cool. It does make the ending quite ambiguous. So maybe if we'd had a similar, more obvious one that it's the mother's dream or something,
Yeah.
could have worked.
Well, that would have broke the rules, like that the parents aren't getting the dreams, it's the
Ah,
kids.
true. Yeah. It may be a slightly kind of like the end of Friday the 13th. It might be narratively a little harder to sell, but also it works so well that I'm tempted to just, brush off that criticism and just say, no, it made the movie end stronger. I'm cool with it.
Given the sequels and the increasingly ridiculous ways they had of bringing Freddy back each time, it's good to just have that. Well, he's still there, and I remember
Yeah.
one of the movies starts with a dog digging up Freddy's bones, and that's how he gets resurrected. So,
Yeah. Well, what can I say? Eventually in the sequels, it's just got to happen. Don't worry about the rules. But
yeah,
anyway, the original is a very different breed. But that is, I think, everything I had to say on this one. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. You picked up on some stuff that I completely passed me by. So that was awesome. I'm going to edit in those clips if I can find them.
yeah. I mean, it might just be me over analyzing it, but there's things that came into my head as I was watching it.
No, it's all good. No such thing as over analysis.
Yeah.
But, all right. Well, thank you ever so much. As we're filming this before you do the real life side of things, I hope that goes well.
Yeah, it should do. I've started a bit on it. I just, I feel like I need to dive a bit more into this whole dream thing to be able to, discuss it properly. I wanted to look at like what the actual causes were behind these weird dreams they were having, and yeah, so that'll be my next bit of research, diving into that. That sounds very interesting.
Nice. All right. Well, all the best with this, and thanks again.
All right, thanks for having me on.
No worries. And to everyone watching this, I hope you enjoyed it very much. We have more real versus real horror on the way. The next, some of the ones we're covering coming up are the cases of Leopold and Loeb as adapted, inspiring Alfred Hitchcock's film Rope, and Hostel, inspired by the idea of murder tourism websites.
They sound good.
I know I've been finding so many cases and just making a little note like, yep, we can do that. We can do that. I'm finding so many of them, but they are in the future. So I will round off by thanking you again and thanking everyone who watched. And I hope you enjoyed that. And as I always round off by saying, thanks, y'all. Cheers.
Bye.